So next up, we want to take a look at some of the private variables we're going to be using inside of the component, and a couple of them that we know we're going to be using. We're going to be using our character controller inside of here. So we are going to want to access some velocity and gravity. So let's go ahead and set up a couple of private variables that give us those names. So we'll do a velocity. And in our velocity, we're looking for just a vector 3. And the vector 3, let's go ahead and just set the vector 3 to a 0. So we'll do vector 3 dot 0. And what is this exactly? How is it going to be used? Well, this is going to be a way to store the player's movement in the velocity for the x, y, and z. Now, this is a lot like the player control that we set up for Mario. So some of these things are going to be similar to, which is good. It's going to be similar to some of those components and settings that we had inside of the player control. So let's do this one as a store the player movement and velocity. We'll do the enemy just to separate them out. This will be our x, y, and z. Additional private variables, we've got a gravity that we want to work with. And with the gravity, we are looking at what? We are looking at a float variable. And what is gravity going to do for us? Well, gravity is going to keep our player weighted to the world, basically pushing this player down. And again, let's make sure we spell these right. There we go, much better. So this is going to weight the player down, so it'll be the weight of the world. Okay, another private variable that we're going to look at. We're going to need to store the current state of our player. We're also going to need to set up a connection with our anim play. So we'll have a private variable for anim play. And then we also want to find out what direction are we going here. So we're going to set up as is right. And this will just be a boolean. And we'll set our initial position to false. And then we also need to store the initial transform position. So we're going to store our initial transform position in case we need to work with that later. So we'll do a my transform. And the transform is just going to be, we could set it to the transform. In this case, we're going to go ahead and just set it to the vector 3 so that we're already at the position. And then we've also got our private variables for our resetting the speed, because we know we're going to have a speed, we're going to have an attack speed, so we're going to be changing between those. And we need to be able to reset it back to the initial move speed, so we want to store that in a variable. So we can have a reset move speed. And with the reset move speed, it's going to be a float variable again. And what do we want this to equal? We're going to have this equal 0, 0 for right now. And what's that next private variable? Well, we've got our move speed that we're working with here, and if we kind of look on down, we also have a jump speed. If we do change that, we might want to reset, but that may end up being a piece of a homework assignment. The other things that we want to look at as we go on down is we have a distance to the home and a distance to the target. So we've got that return range and the target. So let's store information which is, distance to home and distance to target. we'll do a distance to target. Okay, that gives us those. And then we also want to make a private variable for controller. It's the controller for the character controller. So let's set that one up. Okay, and let's go ahead and make sure we're defining these as we go. And we can also set up the position real quick, just make it look nice and pretty. Find out which one's our longest one. And we'll be somewhere in here. And with the word wrapping, let's go ahead and take our options. We've got word wrap long lines. We've actually got it turned off. We'll go ahead and just open this up just a little bit more. There we go. Okay, so for the current state, this is just holding the current state for setting later. And then for our anim play, get the component for animations. And then for our is right, what we're looking for is just setting the direction. Which way is our character going? Because we are dealing with something too, that we're dealing with a 2D setup, which means our character's going to be moving left. We need to play left animations. Right, we need to play right animations. And we're just trying to give ourselves that variable to work with. For the myTransforms, we're going to store our initial position. For our reset move speed, the reset move speed is going to just store basically the initial move speed in the beginning. That way, in case we do anything with the move speed, we can always revert back to it. And the distance to the home, we're just getting the distance to the home position. And then with our distance to our target, we're getting the distance to the target position. And with our player controller, we are doing just that, setting up for an instance of our player controller. Alright, this is going to set us up for most of the variables that we're going to use. We may add to, take away some of these, but this just gives us a good starting point so that we're not jumping around too much in our script, back and forth, and we can focus more on the functions and then using our variables and our private variables inside of those functions. So to finish this off, let's also go ahead and go through and look at the type of functions that we want to set up. We are going to be using our function start. And before we type it in, we do have the option for our function list, just to drop it in real nice and quick. And then we're also going to be using our update function. So let's drop our update function in. And from there, we're also going to be using some more handmade functions, and we'll look at those after we drop in our onTrigger enter function. Then let's start creating the functions we want to use. And what can these functions be? Well, we want one to be able to move him left and right. So we're going to say a patrol right and patrol left. And we're not going to be passing any information just yet. Okay, and let's go ahead and just define these as we go through them. This is going to move the enemy right. Then we're going to need a function to handle move the enemy left, and we'll call this a patrol left. And then what else do we want in here? We want to be able to basically have the object go to an idle, to a stop position. So let's have him idle right and idle left. So we'll do a function for idle right. We'll do a function for, and you guessed it, idle left. And let's go ahead and define those two. Those two are going to basically set the movement to 0 and in the right direction, which is what idling is doing. So and here, same thing, set movement to 0 and face left. And let's just give ourselves a little more space and bump up here on the screen. Okay, next thing we want to do is look at some functions to handle what else. We're idling, we're patrolling, and then we also had, and again, this is kind of going back on our game design, left, right, we're stopping, we want to jump, die, and go home. So when you look at this, you can see that this is a function. This is going to be just handling some information. To kill this player, what do I need to do? Well, let's just stick it into a function. And that's what we're doing here. We're idling. This is where we're stopping. And that next one is to jump. We want to jump into the air, so let's have a function to jump. But again, jump what? Left and right. So let's do a jump right. Let's do a function for jump left. And what is jump left and jump right doing? It just jumps in the air to the right, jumps in the air to the left. And we'll do jump in air to left. Looking good so far. We can tell we are going to have a number of functions, but most of these are going to be pretty simple on the actual code base is what's inside of that function. We also had, from the jumping, we had dying, so let's go ahead and set up to kill our player. So our function is going to be die, and what will we do? Die right, as to opposed to dying left. And this is just going to kill the enemy right and kill the enemy left. Okay, and our next function we can think about is going to be something a little bit more complicated. Not too much so, but it's some of the real action that happens with it. We want to be able to chase the player. And that kind of goes back into some of the properties that we have for setting a range, for detecting the player. And then once we detect him, we want to be able to chase the player in the direction that the player is. So we'll have a function that handles chase player. And we'll just call that one chase player. And what does the chase player do? It's going to check for where the player is in relation to our position. Which is going to be a fun little script to go through because we're just doing some simple logic of finding out where is that player, and if he's to the left or the right of us, then move in that direction to try to get to him. And then we also want a function to go home, which is one of our states. We want to be able to send the Goomba back to that home position. Where did he start at? So let's set up a function to handle go home. And the go home finds the home node and it returns to it. And then our last function that we're going to look at, and of course we might have additional ones, but I think this one's going to tie us off, is going to be an onDraw gizmo. We're going to be using this one to set up some of our tools so that we can see them. So if we go in here, we could do the onDraw gizmo, or just for the fun of it, we'll go to the other functions, and we've got the onDraw gizmo. We'll drop that one in there. Dropped it just a little bit far. There we go. And what is it going to handle? It's just going to toggle the gizmos for the designer to be able to see the ranges that we set. Okay. So if we take a minute and look at what we are about to get into, there is a bit of work ahead of us, but it's going to be some fun work, and it's going to give us the opportunity to put in some control and some logic to this character and get this character moving back and forth and all over and chasing our Mario character. And now that we have our functions in place and the majority of our properties set up, we'll go ahead and start defining each one of these functions and getting it all going just right. We'll do that next.